They told me I was an unfit grandmother. They told a judge I was dangerous, that I couldn't be trusted around my own grandchildren, that I had a drinking problem I never had and a temper I never showed. And for 11 months, the court believed every single word my daughter-in-law said about me. I sat in that courtroom in my good blue dress, 70 years old, watching strangers decide whether I'd ever hold my grandbabies again, and I thought I'd lost everything. But I hadn't counted on one phone call. One voice from an army hospital 3 states away who was about to blow the whole case wide open. My name is Teresa, and before I tell you how a military doctor I'd never met saved my family, I need you to sit with me a minute, because this story still makes my hands shake when I tell it. If you believe grandmothers deserve better than what this world hands them, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because I've got a lot more truth to tell you, and I don't want you missing a single word of it. Alright, let's go back to where it all started. My son's name was David. He was my only child, and from the day he was born he had this quiet steadiness to him, the kind that made teachers trust him and dogs follow him home. He joined the army at 19 against my wishes at first, but I came around when I saw what it did for him. Gave him purpose. Gave him pride. He married a woman named Amanda when he was 26, home on leave, and I'll admit I had my doubts from the start. She was polished in a way that didn't sit right with me. Perfect makeup at 7 in the morning, perfect answers to every question. Never a hair out of place even when the house was falling apart around her. But David loved her and I loved David, so I swallowed my doubts and I welcomed her like she was my own. They gave me 2 grandchildren. Emma, who has David's exact laugh, and Lucas, who was still in diapers the last time I held him free and easy, before everything went sideways. For years I was the grandmother who showed up. I drove 2 hours every other weekend. I sewed Emma's Halloween costumes by hand. I taught Lucas to fish off the dock behind my house. Amanda used to call me her built-in babysitter, and I didn't mind because it meant I got to be close to those babies, and close to my son whenever he was stateside between deployments. Then David got deployed overseas for the 4th time, and something in Amanda changed. I noticed it first in small ways. She stopped answering my calls right away. She started finding reasons I couldn't take the kids for the weekend. She'd cancel visits an hour before I was set to arrive, always with some excuse. Emma has a headache, Lucas has a fever, we're just so busy right now, Teresa. I told myself it was stress. A young mother, husband overseas, 2 kids under 10. I gave her grace. Lord knows I gave her more grace than I had any business giving. The visits kept shrinking. A weekend became an afternoon. An afternoon became an hour at a public park where she'd stand off to the side on her phone the entire time. I started to feel like a stranger being granted a favor instead of a grandmother seeing her grandchildren, and it broke something in me, but I still didn't fight it because David was overseas and I didn't want to add worry to his plate. I wrote him letters instead. I told him things were strained with Amanda, nothing more, because I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who stirred up trouble in her son's marriage from 4,000 miles away. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I'd just gotten home from my church's Tuesday prayer group, and there were 2 cars I didn't recognize parked outside my house. A man and a woman got out, showed me a badge and a folder, and told me they were there on behalf of Child Protective Services following a report that I had endangered my grandchildren during an unsupervised visit 3 weeks prior. I want you to understand something. There was no unsupervised visit 3 weeks prior. I hadn't seen those children in over a month, but I stood on my own porch, 70 years old, in my church clothes, being told I was under investigation for endangering the 2 people I loved most in this world. I let them in. I answered every question. I showed them my home, my medications on the counter, blood pressure pills and nothing stronger, my clean kitchen, my guest room set up with 2 little beds for whenever the grandkids stayed over. They left without much to say, but the damage was already sitting in my chest like a stone. Somebody had made a report. Somebody had lied. Didn't take a genius to figure out who. 2 weeks later I got served with paperwork. Amanda had filed for a restraining order against me, alleging that I had shown up at her home intoxicated, that I had grabbed Lucas by the arm hard enough to leave a mark, that I had a documented history of erratic behavior that made me a danger to her children. Every single word of it was fabricated. I have never in my life had more than half a glass of wine at Christmas. I have never raised my hand or my voice at either of those children. But there it was, typed up, official and signed, and a judge granted a temporary order before I ever got the chance to speak. I remember sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot after that hearing, just shaking. 70 years old and treated like a criminal because a young woman decided I was inconvenient. I called David that night, and it was one of the hardest phone calls of my life because the connection was bad and he was clearly exhausted and stretched thin from his deployment, and I had to tell my son that his wife was accusing his mother of hurting his children. He didn't believe it either at first. He told me it had to be a misunderstanding, that Amanda must have been scared or overwhelmed, that we'd sort it out when he got home. I wanted so badly to believe that too. But something in his voice had changed, something cautious, and I realized later that Amanda had already been working on him from her side, filling his ear with her own version of things during every call, every letter, every video chat, while I sat 3 states away with no one but my lawyer and my faith to lean on. The court dates started piling up. Amanda showed up every time dressed like she was headed to a job interview, soft-spoken, dabbing at her eyes at exactly the right moments. She had an answer for everything. She brought in a therapist who testified about the emotional impact of my alleged behavior on the children. A therapist who had never once met me or observed me with those kids. She brought in a neighbor who claimed to have seen me arrive at her house unsteady on my feet. A neighbor I later learned had only ever seen me from a second-story window at dusk. It was theater and she performed it beautifully, and the judge, God bless him for trying, only had what was put in front of him. My lawyer was a good man. But even he told me privately that these cases are an uphill climb for grandparents, especially when the custodial parent controls the narrative and the children are too young to be reliable witnesses in the eyes of the court. Emma was 8. Lucas was 5. Amanda had already told them things I found out later planted little seeds. Grandma isn't safe right now, Grandma needs some space, we're just protecting you. The kind of thing that sounds loving on the surface and rots a child's trust in someone from the inside out. By the 9th month, the court had extended the restraining order, reduced my son's decision-making input because he was unavailable and unreliable due to deployment, and Amanda had petitioned for full and permanent guardianship rights over the children's welfare decisions, cutting me out entirely and giving herself sweeping authority over David's benefits and his power of attorney documents too. That last part is what should have tipped everyone off sooner. This was never about protecting those babies. This was about control and money, and getting a woman thousands of miles away from her overseas husband to sign away authority she didn't even realize she was signing away. I lost 11 months of my grandchildren's lives. I missed Emma's 9th birthday. I missed Lucas losing his first tooth. I sat in my empty house with photographs on every wall, and I wondered if I would die a stranger to the 2 people who used to run to the door screaming grandma when I pulled into the driveway. And then on a Thursday morning in March, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, an area code from out of state, and a woman's voice on the other end introduced herself as Colonel Diane Wickham, a physician stationed at the military hospital where my son had been receiving treatment. I want to explain something here because it matters. David hadn't just been deployed. 2 months prior, he'd been injured, nothing life-threatening, thank God, a shoulder injury from a training accident, and he'd been stateside for treatment and recovery this whole time, closer than any of us in the family knew, because Amanda had told everyone, including David's own command in some conversations, that contacting his mother would cause unnecessary stress during his recovery. She had been controlling who he spoke to. She had been screening his calls. My son had tried to call me on 4 separate occasions over those months, and Amanda had intercepted every single one, telling him I wasn't answering, telling me nothing at all. Colonel Wickham didn't know any of the family drama when she first called me. She was simply doing her job, working through David's next of kin contact list for a routine care coordination update. And she mentioned, almost in passing, that David had been asking repeatedly why his mother hadn't visited or called during his recovery. I told her with my voice breaking that I hadn't known where he was, that I'd been under a restraining order for 11 months based on accusations I never committed, that I hadn't spoken to my son directly in nearly a year because every call went through Amanda first. There was a long silence on the line. And then Colonel Wickham said something I will never forget. She said, "Ma'am, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation, because some of what I'm hearing doesn't match what's in this patient's file." It turned out David had been talking to hospital staff, to his assigned counselor, even to Colonel Wickham herself during his appointments, expressing confusion and hurt about his mother's sudden absence, about accusations he didn't believe, about a wife who had grown distant and evasive whenever he tried to bring up going home to sort things out in person. None of that was privileged information Colonel Whitcomb was obligated to withhold from a family member helping coordinate his care. And once she understood the legal situation I was in, she did something I will be grateful for until my last breath. She offered to submit a formal statement to the court. Her statement laid it out plainly. David had been recovering at a stateside facility, fully capable of communication for months, directly contradicting Amanda's sworn claims to the court that he was unreachable overseas and unable to weigh in on custody matters. It documented David's own repeated requests to contact his mother, requests that had gone unanswered on my end only because I never received them. It raised serious questions about who exactly had been controlling information flow in this family, and why. That single piece of testimony cracked the whole case open. My lawyer requested an emergency hearing. Once the court had a credible, disinterested medical professional's account contradicting Amanda's sworn statements about David's location and availability, everything else Amanda had presented started getting a second look. The neighbor's testimony didn't hold up under a harder cross-examination. The therapist admitted under oath that her assessment was based entirely on second-hand reports from Amanda, not on any direct observation of me. And when David was finally truly reached, properly without Amanda as the go-between, he gave a statement from his hospital room that broke the case wide open for good. He said he had never witnessed any behavior from his mother that resembled what was described in the filings. He said he wanted to speak to me immediately. He said he was terrified about what had been happening at home in his absence. I remember the day the restraining order was lifted like I remember the day Emma was born. My lawyer called me, and I had to sit down on my kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. The judge didn't just lift the order. He ordered a full review of the guardianship petition Amanda had filed, and once investigators started pulling threads, they found financial irregularities too. Withdrawals from David's accounts that didn't match any household expense, a power of attorney application that David had never actually signed, forged with a signature an examiner later confirmed didn't match his service record documents. What started as a custody dispute turned into something much bigger. Something with real legal consequences for Amanda that were entirely out of my hands and, frankly, none of my business to gloat over. David came home 3 weeks later, shoulder still healing, and the first thing he did was drive straight to my house with Emma and Lucas in the back seat. I heard the car in the driveway and I was out the door before it even stopped rolling. Emma ran to me first and she was crying and she kept saying, "I'm sorry, Grandma, I'm sorry, someone told her things that weren't true." And I got down on that gravel driveway with my old niece screaming at me and I held both those children so tight I thought I might never let go again. It's been a year and a half now. David has primary custody. The kids stay with me every other weekend, same as it always was, and Lucas caught his first real fish off my dock last summer. A little bass that he still talks about like it was a marlin. Emma sleeps over most Fridays and we bake together and she tells me everything, the way she used to before all this happened, before someone tried to convince an 8-year-old that her grandmother was dangerous. I think about Colonel Whitcomb often. A woman I've still never met in person, who didn't know my family anything, who could have stayed in her lane and treated one shoulder injury and moved on to the next patient. Instead, she noticed something didn't add up and she said something, and because she said something, I got my grandbabies back. I sent her a handwritten letter when it was all over. I don't know if she kept it, but I hope she did because I meant every word. I share this story now because I know I'm not the only grandmother who's sat in a courtroom feeling invisible, while someone else's lies get treated as gospel. If you're in the middle of something like this right now, I want you to hear me say this clearly. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when it takes longer than you can bear. Keep your paperwork. Keep your patience. Keep showing up exactly the way you always have, because character speaks louder in the end than any performance ever can. If this story meant something to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments if you've ever had to fight for your place in your own grandchildren's lives. I read every single one. Thank you for sitting with me through this. I'll see you in the next story.